Hey there everyone, Mychal A. Bryan here from the Oraculos School of Astrology. And before we dive into today's program, I just want to say a major thank you to all of you who've been supporting my work by purchasing my books, Mastering Traditional Astrology, Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, and the New Western Medical Astrology. Thank you all so much for supporting the work that we do over here and for supporting me as a self-published author. And if you haven't already purchased my books, please make sure to go over on Amazon and grab yourself copies today so that you can dive into this wonderful world of magical astrology that I've curated for you within these 3 books. And if you've already purchased copies of these books, then please make sure to leave us a review over on Amazon, because that is how Amazon supports me as a self-published author. Once again, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, and do enjoy today's program. So let's go and take a look at some of the charts that are necessary for us to consider as we move into this upcoming conjunction. One of the things that really made me pause and consider the gravity or the impacts of this Saturn-Neptune conjunction was when I did the Capricorn Ingress delineation in December. And in that Capricorn Ingress delineation, one of the things that we found for the chart of Washington, D.C., the Capricorn Ingress chart of Washington, D.C. for December 21st, 2025, was that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction was occurring within the 2nd house. Now, for those of you who don't know, we have a rule within traditional astrology that states that if a planet is within 5 degrees of the next house cusp and in the same sign as the next house cusp, that indicates that that planet has already shifted its energetic loyalties to that next house. So here we have the Saturn within 5 degrees of the next house cusp, which is the 2nd house cusp, and therefore we have both Saturn and Neptune within the 2nd house. Now, a part of why that's problematic is because in a Capricorn Ingress chart for a particular capital city, the 2nd house is going to represent the money of the people of that city within that coming period of time. And here we have the Saturn and the Neptune in the 2nd house. Neither Saturn nor Neptune has a natural analogous relationship with money. Saturn, the ancients say, is a hoarder of money, but when it comes to our natal astrological delineation, we don't necessarily like to see Saturn or Neptune within the 2nd house. A part of this is because any house in which we find Saturn within a natal chart is going to be a house or an area of life where we find ourselves doing the greatest amount of learning within this lifetime. So we have Saturn present here within the 2nd house. And so from a very basic perspective, those of us who live in the United States of America, it's a topic that we're going to have to do the greatest amount of learning around within this coming year that the Capricorn Ingress chart is indicating, which is the year 2026. So on the one hand, that is what we see already indicated with the Saturn being in the 2nd house. The secondary thing that we see indicated is that Neptune is in the 2nd house, and we know that Neptune is essentially representing disillusionment once more, and this dissolving force. And thus having Neptune within the 2nd house is also saying and threatening the economic well-being, the financial well-being of the United States of America within this coming year-long period, because the Capricorn Ingress chart is the chart that those of us who practice Uranian astrology use in order for us to understand what's going to be occurring within the country for that coming year. Another thing that indicates financial instability within this coming year, and I'm just using this chart because I want to show how we've seen these patterns unfolding already and how these patterns are likely to unfold as we move towards the future together. Another thing that we see within this chart that might indicate financial instability is the fact that we have the part of fortune at 29 degrees of Aquarius, 32 minutes, in a square relationship with Uranus, which is the planet that fundamentally has to do with instability. Now, within a natal chart reading, the part of fortune could also be considered the part of our desires. And so part of fortune Uranus is on the one hand indicating that we're moving into a period of advanced technological advancement and advanced scientific advancement on the one hand. And so that's something that we love, and that's something that we see particularly as it relates to the introduction of artificial intelligence in a lot of what we find ourselves doing within this current period of time. So this combination is indicating the very real and the very potent and the very front of mind impact that technology is going to have upon us within this coming year of 2026. But on the other hand, if we were to look at the part of fortune from a traditional perspective, the part of fortune in a square relationship with Uranus is another indication of financial instability within the United States of America within this year of 2026. We also note that within this chart from a traditional perspective, we have Saturn, which is ruling the people of the country within this year. And we also have Saturn ruling the undoing of the people of the country within this year. And here we find both the people and their undoing manifesting within the second house, which is another indication of financial difficulty and another indication that the mind of the people is going to be primarily focused on this topic of finances. Now, another thing within this chart that I find to be quite interesting is that in this chart, we have the moon at 17 degrees of Capricorn, 17 minutes. And the moon is a universal significator of the people within any astrological chart that is erected for mundane astrological reasons. So here we have the moon within the 12th house in the sign of Capricorn, which is saying that the people might be feeling a sense of uncustomary coldness or lack, or just a general feeling of things not necessarily being as they should be within the coming period of time. Now, a final thing that we note within this chart that I think is going to tie more fully into what we're here to talk about is that we have Saturn at 25 degrees of Pisces, 38 minutes, applying to the conjunction of Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces, 24 minutes. This combination of Saturn and Neptune in general is a combination of chronic diseases. And the textbook definition of this is the unhampered progress of malady and diseases of long duration. Furthermore, Saturn is representing the people of the United States of America within this particular ingress chart, and therefore this can be an indication that the people in applying to Neptune are going to find themselves, one, not only deeply disillusioned in general by the state of affairs of the United States of America, but also that the people are going to find themselves in a state of physically feeling incapable of either defending themselves or supporting themselves or protecting themselves from the things that might potentially interfere with their own sense of sovereignty. Now, this can indicate a lack of boundaries that's causing the world around the country to feel as if it's washing in beyond the borders of the country in a way that is probably making the people uncomfortable within this coming year. But it can also indicate the ways in which sickness and illnesses tends to have that same effect, where this type of illness, Neptunian type of illnesses that manifest, seem to manifest completely out of nowhere. And before you know it, and before you can actually put a finger on what's going on, you realize that the entire world around you is now ill, and you too within it are also ill. So the combination of Saturn-Neptune within the context of this Capricorn ingress chart for the United States of America could be an indication of illness on the horizon and a general sense of lack of vitality, lack of health, and an overall disillusionment in general, that the American people find themselves in a state of disappointment, in a state of disillusionment, and also in a state where they are physically unwell within this coming year of 2026. Now that we've established that as a background of things, I think it's also relatively or slightly interesting to note that this is not the only chart in which we find the impact of this Saturn and Neptune being relevant. As we move now towards the Aries Ingress chart for the year 2026, we find other indications of how this coming together of Saturn and Neptune are going to manifest, not only within the world at large, but also particularly within the United States of America. And I'm going to speak about that chart from the perspective of the US, but then beyond that, we're going to take a look at how those astrological combinations impact the world in its entirety. All right, so now we are taking a look at the Aries Ingress chart for March 20th, 2026 for Washington, D.C. And we're only going to take a cursory look at this right now because we do want to get to looking at the actual Aries Ingress of Saturn and Neptune, which is why we are here. But within this chart, I think it's quite interesting because the Aries Ingress chart is the chart of the sun's ingress into the sign of Aries. And typically within astrology, we use this chart as a means of giving us insight into the year ahead. And there are other considerations as to whether or not this chart will indicate the entire year or whether or not we should look at other charts as well to give us more insight into various parts of the year. But in general, this Aries Ingress chart is used to give us insight and some form of indication into what will be occurring within the year ahead. And within this chart, we see that the sun is ingressing into Aries and automatically applying to the conjunction, the corporal or the bodily conjunction of both Neptune and Saturn, which means that this Saturn ingressing into Aries isn't just some small consideration. This Saturn ingressing into Aries is going to be a consideration that is of vital importance to everything and to everyone because the sun in an Aries Ingress chart and the aspects that that sun makes and receives within an Aries Ingress chart are going to be important in terms of all of us for the year ahead. Because we are looking at this chart from the perspective of the sun. Therefore, aspects of the sun are going to be vitally important. And so when we look at this chart, we see the sun applying to the conjunction of Neptune. Sun-Neptune, from a planet-to-planet based perspective, indicates a day of disappointment. Since we're using this as a chart for the year ahead, this is indicating a year of disappointment or a year of disillusionment. The sun and Saturn are interesting because the sun, on the one hand, is indicating the imprint of an individual identity in the form of the human soul. And Saturn is representing the imprint of the individual human identity in the form of the human body. So when we bring the sun and Saturn together, essentially we're looking at two forces within nature that have the ability to individualize. And this idea of the sun being an individualizer and Saturn being an individualizer is a part of why when either the sun is standing with Neptune or Saturn is standing with Neptune, it is such a challenging thing. And the big part of that challenge is because both the sun and Saturn are responsible for creating a sense of our individual existence, whereas Neptune is specifically responsible for eroding all sense of our individual existence. Thus, when we have a year in which we are starting the year with the conjunction of the sun and Neptune, it's saying that this is a year in which we will find ourselves finding and facing a general theme of disappointment and disillusionment within the world at large. Now, this goes back to what we were saying previously with the Justice card, because the Justice card is showing this essentially chaotic relationship between the forces that desire to manifest and the forces that desire to erode the world that we're manifesting. And when we find ourselves faced with this level of push and pull between these two forces, it can sometimes make us feel as if we want to step out of the race entirely because we don't feel as if we have the wherewithal to keep on going. However, the Sun-Neptune can also be indicative of a year of deepened spirituality. And I think that that's very important because when we find that the systems within the world around us are failing us, and when we find that the systems that exist and that we've always relied upon are no longer reliable, it causes us to turn towards our spiritual resources as a means of better navigating the times with which we are faced. And so, even though this combination of the Sun-Neptune does represent a year of disappointment, a year of deception, a year of disillusionment, a year of us not being able to trust what is manifesting within the world around us, this combination is also indicative of, as a result of us not being able to trust the physical world and our physical senses, it does call us more deeply into trusting and relying upon the spiritual world and our spiritual resources as we navigate the coming times. I think this is something that we are seeing happening massively globally amongst people, whether that is the return of people towards their own indigenous religious structures, or whether that is people simply moving back into finding ancient forms of knowing and ancient forms of being with the world. I think that this idea of relying on ancient spirituality has become such a critical theme within the lives of so many of us, because we are realizing that the world that we know does not necessarily have the resources to hold us and sustain us in the ways that we desire to be held and sustained. So this is the first thing that we're seeing as we take a look at this combination. Now, another thing that we have going on within the sky, and I'm going to use our Uranian astrology resources as a means to give us further insight, is we essentially have Neptune standing on the Sun-Saturn midpoint. And the Sun-Saturn, much like the Sun-Neptune meaning a day or a year of disappointment, the Sun-Saturn could mean a year of heaviness, or a year of depression, or a year where it feels as if we're having to navigate some very huge themes, and those huge themes aren't necessarily giving us a sense of lightness or freedom within our lives. These are some of the things that we see with Sun-Saturn. A Sun-Saturn year could be a year in which we find ourselves faced with the gravity of Saturn himself. And what did Saturn do? Saturn ate all of his babies. And what else does Saturn represent? Saturn represents the cold and dry, lonely sentinel at the edge of our solar system. So this could feel like a year in which we don't really have the sort of support that we expected ourselves to have. And not only individually, but also globally, because we find ourselves being ushered as a world in general into a period that feels particularly cold, that feels particularly callous, and that also feels particularly unloving. Now, as we further investigate this chart, I'm using the Uranian astrology tools because the Uranian astrology tools also give us this inbuilt description of what these combinations represent. So Sun-Saturn within this program, which is called Nova Chart Wheels, indicates old age, the old man, serious man. But more specific to the times, it indicates bitter experiences, personal and bodily hindrances and difficulties, bodily difficulties through separation. I think this brings us back to the theme of the Saturn-Neptune representing chronic illnesses, because this Sun-Saturn combination is similarly representing bitter experiences that might be rooted in not only our internal psychological hindrances, but also in our bodily hindrances. And a part of those bodily hindrances might directly have to do with the manifestation of things that are affecting our health globally, that's getting in the way of us really feeling as if we're stepping into the most vitalizing period of time as we move into this period of 2026 and beyond. Now, we have Neptune standing on the Sun-Saturn midpoint. So if we were to go and investigate what that means, Neptune standing on the Sun-Saturn midpoint, we find this interpretation within Nova Chart Wheels. It says, the body weakened through long illness. Lack of clarity causes hindrances and obstacles. Now, we saw this previously, this idea of the body that is weakened through long illnesses, when we initially looked at the Capricorn Ingress chart, in which we saw the coming together of the Saturn and the Neptune in Pisces. And my statement regarding that was, this could be a year in which the people of this country, because Saturn is representing the people of this country this year, this could be a year in which the people of this country find themselves faced with some health crisis that is going to be of some noteworthy impact that requires all of our attention. So we saw that already prophesied, as it were, within the Capricorn Ingress chart. And in our moving into the Aries Ingress chart, we see the same thing indicated with the Sun coming together with the Neptune, Sun-Neptune, which we already know means the body that is weakened by ailments. From a medical astrology perspective, this coming together of the Sun and the Neptune is quite significant because within the context of medical astrology, Sun-Neptune is one of the general combinations that we look for because Sun-Neptune is indicating for us a general signification that the body is weakened or that there is some physical issues going on with the body that causes the body to be weakened as a result of some illnesses that it might be facing. Because from a medical astrology perspective, Sun-Saturn is similarly another combination that we oftentimes reference because that combination of Sun-Saturn similarly means a body that is weakened by some chronic factors. To the fact that we have Sun, Saturn, and Neptune standing together on the cardinal axis is saying that this topic of illness and sickness is going to be a topic that we all have to face within the world at large. Now, I think it's necessary for us to go into identifying what is the cardinal axis and why is that necessary from a Uranian astrology perspective. The cardinal axis is representing one of the three outer personal points within Uranian astrology, the other two being the nodes in general as one axis, as well as the ascendant. The reason why the ascendant is considered to be an outer personal point is because the ascendant is representing the local environment that we find ourselves a part of. So the three outer personal points are going to be the ascendant, representing our local environment, the nodes, representing our intimate connections, and also the Aries point, or the cardinal axis in its entirety, which is going to represent the world at large. So when we come back over here to the Aries Ingress chart, and we see this Aries point, it isn't just representing 0 degrees of Aries, it's representing 0 degrees of Aries, 0 degrees of Cancer, 0 degrees of Libra, and 0 degrees of Capricorn. So this entire cardinal cross, 0 Aries, 0 Cancer, 0 Libra, 0 Capricorn, this entire cardinal cross is representing the cardinal axis. And when a planet is standing on the cardinal axis, that planet becomes a necessary point of consideration for the world at large. And this is another reason why the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is so important, because the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is essentially indicating a coming together of planets that will not be felt discreetly, but that will be felt by the world at large. And this is true if we have Saturn and Neptune, or any planet for that matter, being in a conjunction on 0 Aries, 0 Cancer, 0 Libra, 0 Capricorn. However, in Uranian astrology, we use a broadened hard aspect suite. And therefore, 15 degrees of all of the fixed signs is also going to be impacted by this coming together of Saturn and Neptune on 0 degrees of Aries. So if you're somebody who has a planet, whether that's your sun, your moon, or whether it's your ascendant or your midheaven, or some other highly personal factor within your chart that is standing at 0 degrees of the cardinal signs, give or take a degree on either side, so 29 degrees mutable or 1 degree cardinal, or if you're somebody who is having a planet within your chart standing on 15 degrees of the fixed signs, give or take a degree on either side, so 16 degrees fixed or 14 degrees fixed, you are somebody who's going to be impacted by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in a very personal way. And at that point, it's a good idea to go and have a conversation with your friendly local astrologer to see how that Saturn-Neptune is going to specifically impact you directly. So coming back over here to the Uranian astrology chart, what we have is corroboration of this idea that this combination of planets is going to indicate illness, because we have Neptune standing on the Sun-Saturn midpoint. And when we look at the interpretation of Sun plus Saturn minus Neptune, it says body weakened through long illnesses and a lack of clarity that causes hindrances and obstacles. And that takes us back to the King of Swords earlier, because the King of Swords is the ultimate symbol of clarity. Now, we may not like the clarity that the King of Swords represents, and sometimes we might stand in direct defiance of the clarity of the King of Swords because we feel as if the King of Swords is too much of a hard ass, or he is too focused on making things make sense, and he isn't really considering the emotional implications of his actions. But this King of Swords is representing that sometimes we do have to lead head first and not heart first. And as we move into this year of 2026, this card is indicating that we do need to have our wits about us. And we do need to have our psychological and our intellectual foundation beneath us, because this is going to be a year and a period of time that is requesting us to be more intellectually sound and more rooted within a sense of what is practical and what is pragmatic, and not within a sense of that which is emotional and in a state of constant fluctuation. And so this card is the remedy to a very large degree of this combination of planets, Sun, Saturn, and Neptune, which is representing a lack of clarity, which causes hindrances and obstacles. But what do we do about the other piece, which is bodily weakness based on long illnesses? That is the piece that is essentially requiring our attention. Now, as we look at this combination, we also see that we don't just have Sun, Saturn, and Neptune, but we also have Sun, Saturn, and Neptune with Chiron essentially standing on the big dot in relationship to them. Now, I know that not everybody is familiar with Uranian astrology, and truthfully, we haven't really taught Uranian astrology at Oraculos for a very long time. However, if you're interested in learning Uranian astrology, we are going to be having another Uranian astrology course coming up this year, and it's going to be the last of its kind, because as many of you know, I'm going into someone said the other day, an early retirement. It's a not so early retirement, because I've been out here working for a very long time. I've been doing this work longer than I've been an adult. And so I am very much ready for my retirement. However, we are going to be having some of our most popular courses this year before that happens. So if you're wanting to dive deeply into Uranian astrology and understand how to integrate that more into your own astrological practice, then by all means, stay tuned, because we're going to be coming out with more Uranian astrology content and more Uranian astrology points of learning. But be it resolved, when we have the pointer pointing on something, as we have this pointer on the Sun, Saturn midpoint, and we see Neptune is there, and we have something else standing on one of these dots in relation to that midpoint, as we have the Chiron standing on the dot, it's saying that that planet standing on that dot is going to be brought more fully and more strongly into the mix of what is unfolding in the year to come. And what we see here is Chiron. Chiron, as we know, is one of the factors within astrology that is representing sickness, illness, diseases of long duration. We know that Chiron had a wound that could never be healed, which gave him the title of the wounded healer. Now, independently, Sun Chiron is representing a physical wound or a psychological wound that can't be healed. Neptune Chiron is similarly representing a disease of long duration, and Saturn Chiron is also representing chronic illnesses. So the fact that we have Sun, Saturn, Neptune, and Chiron all standing together in this way is another indication that our health within this coming year, not just for the United States of America, but for the world at large, is going to be a massive topic that we sincerely need to consider. The fact that we have Uranus is standing on this tiny dot in relationship to the Sun, Neptune, Saturn, and Chiron is saying that the things that are going to be coming up as a result of this combination might catch us all completely off guard. It might be something that none of us are actually expecting, and it might come as a volatile shock to our systems, because who at this current moment is talking about any health situation that's on the horizon for the year to come? I haven't heard anything. And so this Uranus is coming and saying that this entire situation might come as a complete shock to the system, and some of the repercussions that unfold as a result of it might also come as a shock to our system as a result of Uranus also standing on this axis as well. So that's just our use of this Aries Ingress chart to give us some further insight into this coming together of the Saturn and the Neptune. And as we approach closer to the Aries Ingress chart, we will most definitely be needing to take a look at both the traditional version of this chart as well as the Uranian astrology version of this chart once more, as a means of giving us further insight into what to expect within the year ahead. So please make sure that you're subscribed to the Oraculos podcast so that we can dive into this content together. Now, as we take one final look at this Aries Ingress chart before we put it to rest, we note that the people within this year are represented by Mercury, because Mercury is ruling the first house, and the first house within a mundane astrological chart of this nature is going to represent the people of that country. So the people this year are represented by Mercury, and we see that Mercury is in quite awful shape because Mercury is at 8 degrees Pisces, 29 minutes stationed. And when we have this Mercury at 8 degrees Pisces, 29 minutes, we find the Mercury in the sign of both his detriment and his fall, neither of which is good for Mercury at all. So in a sense, without even adding things onto this, we can say that the people within this coming period of time find themselves in a state of sufferation or suffering. Now, we also find the people in the conjunction with the Mars, which from a universal perspective, the people plus Mars can say that within this coming period of time, the people find themselves greatly overwhelmed and greatly hot and bothered and greatly aggravated and irritated and inflamed and angry about the state of affairs that they find themselves in. And this is regarding the people of the United States of America, because this is the Aries Ingress chart for Washington, D.C. So this is something that we find manifesting as we move towards the year ahead. We're kind of already in the year ahead. But the other thing that is noteworthy is that in this coming year, we find that those same people are in the conjunction with the ruler of the sixth house. Now, as we know, the sixth house is the house of sickness within astrology. It's not the house of habits. It's not the house of hygiene. And it definitely isn't the house of habits and hygiene together. Because me saying it's not the house of habits and it's not the house of hygiene independently or individually doesn't mean that if you put them together, it now becomes the house of habits and hygiene. No, it's not the house of any of those things. The sixth house is the house of sickness, disease, stress. And so having the people of the United States of America in a conjunction with the ruler of sickness, disease, and stress could say that within this coming year, the people of the U.S. find themselves collectively in a state of heightened stress in general, which is one thing. But also we find yet another corroboration that illness and that sickness in general could be a major theme that's manifesting within the hearts and minds of both the people as well as the government. Because where are the people and the illness residing? The people and the illness are residing within the 10th house, and the 10th house is representing the government. And therefore, we have the sense that the government itself is going to have to be extraordinarily focused on this topic of the people and their illnesses and their diseases and their stresses, because that is going to be the primary concern within this coming year. We also note that the sun within this chart is ruling the land in general. In the famous words of Sylvia Browne, the land. So we have the sun ruling the land, and we see that that land is being afflicted by Neptune. This is something that we're going to talk about more fully as we move into taking a look at this Aries Ingress chart later on in the month of March when we have our Aries Ingress report. but it is noteworthy that this is occurring, and also that the South Node is present here. And when we have the land afflicted by Neptune, it can manifest as water damage, leaking, and flooding. So this is something that we want to be mindful of, particularly as we move into this Aries ingress, that the topics of water damage, leaking, and flooding become major topics within the United States of America. Now, saying flooding for a country isn't necessarily helpful, so I'm going to do my best to look at other years in which flooding has occurred and where that flooding has occurred to see if we can localize where this is likely to be happening within the year 2026. So stay tuned. Hey there, everyone. If you love the sort of astrology that you see here on the Oraculos podcast and you want to practice astrology in this same way, right now you can purchase our medical astrology preliminary and advanced courses from oraculosastrology.com so that you can practice astrology like an Oraculos trained astrologer. In these courses, I teach you everything that I know about medical astrology so that you can begin practicing not only medical astrology, but also so that you can take your first steps in practicing natal astrology just as if you were trained directly by me. So if this is something that you want to do and you're looking to amplify your astrological tools and skills and practice astrology in a more concrete event-based way, then by all means check out oraculosastrology.com and purchase yourself lifetime access to our medical astrology preliminary and advanced courses today. Now, let us go and take a look at the chart for the Saturn and Neptune conjunction. This chart that we have on the screen is for the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is going to take place on February 20th, 2026 at 11:52:22 a.m. EST in Washington, D.C. Now, while we could possibly use this chart to be a predictive chart in which the house cusps are going to be potent or valuable for Washington, D.C., I think it's a lot more useful for us to look at this from a purely planetary perspective. Because when we take a look at it from a purely planetary perspective, it gives us a lot more insight into not just what's going on within this location, but how this planetary combination is going to manifest for the world at large. So to that end, we are going to take a look at the Saturn-Neptune conjunction on the 90-degree dial. Now, as we all know, we can use this dial and turn it around. It is a movable dial. And so now we're going to put the pointer on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction itself to see what else it has in store for us. Now, as we've already discussed on previous episodes, the Saturn-Neptune by itself is representing sickness and pestilence and treacherous diseases of long duration, matches that last a long time, chronic conditions, and habits. So the coming together of the Saturn and Neptune, in my opinion, is something that is very important from a medical astrology perspective, because from a medical astrology perspective, Saturn and Neptune together is one of the worst combinations that we can possibly hope to find. Now, we don't just have Saturn and Neptune coming together, we have Saturn and Neptune coming together and standing on the cardinal axis. And when we take the Saturn and Neptune and minus the cardinal axis from that, it gives us general epidemics, serious sicknesses in the family. So once again, every single thing that we have in relation to Saturn-Neptune by itself and Saturn-Neptune standing on the cardinal axis is pointing in the direction of the manifestation of sickness. But I think there's an even larger theme for us to pay attention to in focusing on this Saturn-Neptune, and that larger theme is essentially the theme of the ways in which Saturn wants to build and Neptune wants to destroy. As we look at this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, we're also reminded that Saturn has to do with the establishment of a world with which we are familiar, and Neptune has to do with erosions to that world. And this is something that we've seen during many of the major wars that have occurred within the world. We've seen the Saturn-Neptune conjunction during the world wars. We've seen the Saturn-Neptune conjunction during issues having to do with segregation. We saw the Saturn-Neptune conjunction when laws were passed to prevent Chinese immigration to America. We've seen the Saturn-Neptune conjunction when the topic of racial segregation also came up within the United States of America, and challenging the normalcy of that and challenging our collective acceptance of that. So the Saturn-Neptune conjunction together is representing something that fundamentally is eroding the very fabric of the society that we find ourselves being a part of. Because oftentimes that society needs to be eroded. But in the process of that erosion, we can find ourselves descending into a veritable level of chaos. We can find ourselves descending into a very true and far-reaching level of confusion. And we can find ourselves not necessarily knowing how to anchor ourselves in the future that's unfolding because everything around us seems chaotic. As the world around us melts, and as all of those colors melt into each other, it becomes very difficult for us to identify or for us to pull out of that melting hot mess, as it were, something that feels singular or something that we can hold on to. And so this might indicate that we all find ourselves going through a period of the valley of the shadow of death, where we all find ourselves feeling as if we're not sure what structures to turn to, who we can trust. We're not sure if we can even trust the established orthodoxy of our governments, because our governments are proving to not be able to have what it takes to support us and sustain us. We're probably not even going to be sure if we can trust the decisions that are being made collectively for us as a society, because the Saturn and the Neptune is coming together and saying things that seem to serve the common good of everybody are the very things that we're going to find ourselves doubtful of. So this coming together of Saturn and Neptune on the cardinal axis is ushering us into a period of deep chaos and confusion. And not necessarily chaos and confusion for its own sake, but chaos and confusion because who we thought we could trust and what we thought we could trust slowly starts to crumble beneath us. So that is what this means on a more macrocosmic level. But on the microcosmic level of our personal daily lives, the Saturn-Neptune coming together does say to us that we need to find more ways to guard our health. We need to find more ways to be on top of our personal immunity, because Saturn and Neptune has to do with diseases of long duration, treacherous diseases that occur and we aren't even aware that they are occurring. It has to do with things that completely catch us by surprise that have a direct impact on our health. Now, other combinations standing on this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, or that are related to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, is the Chiron, which is standing on this big dot on the 90-degree dial, which means that the Chiron is having a direct relationship to where the pointer is pointing. And we see that the pointer is pointing onto the Saturn-Neptune conjunction itself. Now, even though there's no officially written down definition of what Chiron means on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, we know that these three cosmic factors have to do with chronic illnesses. Saturn by itself is the god of chronicity. Neptune is the god of dissolving the sovereignty of our physical body's right to be healthy. And Chiron is a wound that cannot heal. So when we see these three factors together, it is most definitely pointing us in the direction of some major health concern that is on the horizon for us as we move into this coming year, and that is going to have considerable effects on the world at large. And so that's what we get with the coming together of these factors. Now, as I continue to look at this chart, I also notice that it seems as if the moon is standing on the Saturn-Chiron midpoint, which means the moon is also standing on the Saturn-Neptune-Chiron midpoint. And having the moon there makes it even more personal. Because what is the moon if not the people? The moon is representing the people of a country in general, the people at this time in general. And so the moon standing there is saying that it is the people, if we were to interpret this, the people find themselves concerned with some chronic health concern that is difficult for us to rectify and that seems to have long-term impacts on our overall health and well-being, is what we see with the moon standing there. This is something that is coming as a shock to the system that none of us may have been expecting. And it's also probably something that is impacting the physical work that we're able to do and perform within the world at large, because we have the Sun and Mars standing there as well. So once again, we have this story of people being impacted within their own physical ability to take care of themselves. And it's something that's coming as a shock to us all. Now, we also see that Mercury and Pluto are standing there as well. And this is something that I know only because it's something that I stated in my book, The New Western Medical Astrology. But Mercury-Pluto is a combination that we oftentimes find accompanying other combinations that get in the way of our fertility. And I think that this could be because from a Uranian astrology perspective, Mercury has to do with small children, and Pluto oftentimes has to do with denial. So sometimes Mercury-Pluto can impact our ability or can be a part of larger astrological combinations that are having an impact on our fertility in general. So possibly the health concern that might be on the horizon for us is a health concern that is having a direct ramification on our own fertility potential. And if it is not having a direct ramification on our own fertility potential, it might possibly be having a major impact on the children at large of the world at this time. So we're talking about something that could impact children, and that is something that we might need to be paying attention to as we move into the year ahead. Now, another thing that I noticed within this is that we essentially have Chiron and the node in a 45-degree relationship with each other. As we know in Uranian astrology, we take these 45-degree relationships personally because the 45-degree relationships are relationships that represent the manifestation of concrete events. Now, just which 45-degree relationship is that? We have Chiron at 23 degrees cardinal, and we have the node at 9 degrees of the mutable signs. And we know that 23 degrees cardinal equals 8 degrees mutable. And so this is Chiron and the node within a sesquiquadrate within 1 degree of arc. So when we come back over here and we see Chiron and the node standing together, what does that say? Once again, from our own medical astrology research, we know that Chiron and the node has to do with intimate connections with sick people, which is why we often find hard aspect relationships between Chiron and the node within the charts of people who are working within the medical industry. And so here, this could be indicating that another theme that we all have to pay attention to within this year is the medical industry in general and the ways in which intimate connections with sick people becomes a concern of all of us, not just a concern of the doctor, not just a concern of the physician or the herbalist or the Ayurvedic counselor, but this interaction with sick people becomes something that seems to be baked into the larger or our larger understanding of ourselves within this coming period of time. And once again, we do see the combination of Saturn and Neptune standing on that, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a little bit telling that we're talking about issues that have a chronic manifestation or a long-term manifestation. So these are some of the things that we see being ushered in under the auspices of the Saturn-Neptune. On the one hand, we have this idea that things that have long been held as being social norms are now going to be challenged in a way that probably is going to be very uncomfortable, in a way that's probably going to feel very forced. And I say forced because we have Pluto standing here as well. And in a way that's probably going to be very volatile in general for the world at large. because the sort of change that Saturn and Neptune represent is a change that completely shifts the entire landscape of what we thought was real or what we thought was true. And so on the one hand, this is manifesting within the government. And on the one hand, this is manifesting within just our idea of consensus in general, and realizing that a lot of what we hold to be true consensually or true from the perspective of consensus isn't actually or aren't actually things that have the ability to support us as we move towards the future that's being ushered in. Because the future that's being ushered in is one that is melting the very fabric of the governmental institutions, of the fixed institutions that represent security, and of everything that makes us feel fundamentally okay, essentially. So that's one hand of the Saturn-Neptune, and we saw the other hand of the Saturn-Neptune pointing us very much towards our own health. And I think a big part of Saturn-Neptune pointing us towards our own health is also pointing us towards the realization that in times when health becomes more of a topic of crisis, we ourselves have to take our health into our own hands. And sure, there's a lot of emotions around this topic, and sure, there might be a lot of emotions within the world at large in terms of how we navigate these periods of health challenge. But one of the things that we see with this is that in a world where we all might be affected by the sort of health challenges that are on the horizon, we ourselves will most definitely have to be taking our health into our own hands, and we're going to have to find out and figure out how we can best support ourselves as well as those we love from the perspective of their health and vitality. So these two themes, the dissolving of structures, governmental and collectively held psychologically, is the Saturn-Neptune, and the dissolving of our personal sovereignty, of our physical well-being and our physical vitality is also going to be on the line. So the question then becomes, after we speak about all of this, what do we do? How do we integrate all of these teachings into ourselves in a way that doesn't only acknowledge that which is challenging, but also in a way that gives us some space to grow? And to that end, I pull one card from the bottom of our deck as the card of summation. And this card is the Seven of Pentacles. The Seven of Pentacles is a very interesting card because this is representing Saturn in the sign of Taurus. And the Seven of Pentacles says to us that within our joys and within our sorrows, we have to chop wood and carry water. Within some of the more challenging things that occur within our lives, we have to chop wood and carry water. When you are enlightened and when you're not enlightened, you have to chop wood and carry water. Regardless of what is going on within your life, we all have to return back to this basic reality of chopping wood and carrying water. And what that chopping wood and carrying water is meant to indicate is that we have to establish a sense of constancy within our own lives, especially when we find that the world around us doesn't have the ability to establish that for ourselves. We ourselves are having to maintain a sense of that which makes us hopeful, or that which keeps us grounded, or that which keeps us anchored. Because the very coming together of Saturn and Neptune by itself is representing something that throws us all into a state of feeling ungrounded, unanchored, and incapable of truly knowing where we are in space and knowing where we're going. Saturn and Neptune, for many of us, can feel like unwillingly taking a deep dive into our 12th house. And so in a world where that becomes the truth, in a world where that becomes a major factor and a major reality for us, this combination of Saturn and Neptune and the way in which we remedy or remediate the impacts of this combination of Saturn and Neptune is to find a way to keep ourselves stable and grounded and anchored by establishing what are the routines of our lives that aren't going to change, regardless of what goes on within the world economically, as we most definitely have seen a period of upcoming economic upheaval. So regardless of what's going on within our world economically, regardless of what's going on within the world in terms of our governments, as we have seen and borne witness to the fact that the government itself also seems to be in a state of disillusionment and also seems to be in a state where the government can't take care of any of us. As we look at a period of time in which we realize that there are also things larger than us and larger than the government that are likely to be on our horizon in forms of things that impact our health and things that challenge our very vitality and well-being within the world at large. As we look at all of these factors start to constellate around this coming together of the Saturn and the Neptune, factors that transform us at our very core, factors that cause us to view the world around us through different eyes, because the world around us that we see isn't the same world that we went to sleep on the night previously. As all of these things occur and unravel, the question becomes, how do we stabilize ourselves, especially in a world where we cannot trust that world to create forms of stability for us? So that is what we see with this final card of summation in the form of this Seven of Pentacles. And that is the question for all of us. And if you do not know what your stability is or what your stability looks like, now is a wonderful time for you to start to establish for yourself what that's going to mean for you. What hobbies are you going to integrate within your life that allow you to feel a sense of stability, regardless of whether it's raining outside or regardless of whether it's snowing outside? What are the things that you're going to do to create a sense of stability and contemplation and fortitude and anchoring within your life? Because that is what we need now more than ever before. The ability to anchor ourselves, the ability to know that we're doing something that need not bring us any major return on our investment, because the only return on our investment that we need as we move into this 2026 is something that allows us to stay stable. Because within that stability that we fund within ourselves and that we find within ourselves, we'll find the ability to navigate any of the major challenges or the major tumult that we see coming up within the near future as a result of the coming together of the Saturn and the Neptune. So that is our message for now in relation to the combination of the Saturn and Neptune conjunction in Aries. I sincerely hope that you got something from that was useful to you. And also, I sincerely hope that as we move into the rest of 2026, that you refer back to this as often as you need to, so that you can have the tools to better navigate your life. And sometimes it could be something as basic as listening to or repeating something that was said, or listening to a segment of this broadcast that really spoke to you, especially if you find yourself moving through your own period of disillusionment while the world moves through its period of disillusionment. So I sincerely hope that you have found something enlightening and illuminating within this, and that you return to this oracle, because that's essentially what these recordings have been. These recordings have been an oracle for us to know how to navigate our future more effectively. And the future is here. The future is now. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries is happening later on within the month of February. So this is something that is very much on our doorstep. So as we look at that conjunction, the next question has to be, how do we plan the rest of our lives in relationship to it? Because that's going to happen regardless. And maybe on another episode, we'll go into speaking about how it's manifested previously. But at the very minimum, we know that it's going to happen regardless. And I hope that this broadcast has given you some insights into some of the things that we can expect with it happening, and also some of the things that we can do to create a better sense of peace and stability within our own lives as we face this combination ahead. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here once again on the Oraculos podcast. Thank you to all of you who are part of Mychal's Cosmic Conservatory, who have made this possible, because without you, this would not be possible. And definitely thank you all to those of you who have been buying my books, Mastering Traditional Astrology, Horary Astrology, and the Natal Promise, and the New Western Medical Astrology The books have been flying off the shelves over on Amazon, and I'm so grateful to know that so much of my heart is living on the shelves of so many of you as astrologers within our astrology community. So thank you so much for supporting this work. And yeah, please stay tuned to the Oraculos podcast. Share these recordings with your other astrologically minded friends so that all of us can be in the vortex of this concrete astrology together. I love you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.